pyramid schemes, systematic robbery, extortion, rackets, security money, sham unions, cartels, price fixing, drug dealing, and sweatshops. No, I am not talking about the mafia. I'm talking about Nazi German economic practices of the 1930s. Not socialist, not capitalist, simply criminal. Welcome to Between Two Wars, a chronological summary of the interwar years, covering all facets of life, the uncertainty, hedonism, and euphoria, and ultimately humanity's descent into the darkness of the Second World War. I'm Indy Neidell. The so-called good Hitler years in the mid to late 1930s still persist as a myth, but upon closer scrutiny, the myth falls apart. There's also a more recent myth, or a political fallacy, that the Nazis were fiscally left-wing, even socialists, which is based on what some of them said but never actually did. In extremely simplified terms, Hitler's economic ideology is based on the idea of growth through conquest, Lebensraum for the German nation. To perform this conquest, however, he needs strong economic growth and increased resources, which can only be won by conquest. That's a circular, self-referencing system that cannot work. More than anything, though, the Nazi economy is structured like a gigantic organized crime syndicate created to enrich not the state and not the race, but the Nazi leaders and their capos. In essence, the German economy of the 1930s is built to fail, and it will have far-reaching consequences should Germany go to war. Now, we've looked at the German economy in episodes of this series going back 20 years. To say that it has been a roller coaster ride would be an understatement at best. It's more like a wild boom and bust ride through several perfect storms. The long and short of it is that by 1938, Germany has been on and over the brink of economic catastrophe twice since the end of the Great War. The first crisis is the self-inflicted hyperinflation of 1923. But the recovery from that crisis is equally self-made, and it creates the golden years of asymmetric recovery that last almost up to the Wall Street crash of 1929. The most recent crisis in 1930 and 31 is not purely self-inflicted, as the world global financial crisis strikes, but Chancellor Heinrich Brüning manages to make it much worse as he more or less single-handedly destroys any capacity to deal with the world crisis in order to get the Nazis to shut up about reparations. But then came the Nazis and fixed it, right? Well, no. What really happened is that despite the gridlock of the Reichstag, the chaos of the financial world falling apart, unclarity about wartime reparations, and more or less no mandate to govern, the cabinet of Chancellor Franz von Papen, for all of its shortcomings, manages to turn Germany back onto the path to recovery a whole year before the Nazis seize power. And it's not rocket science. They simply repeal the Brüning austerity measures, they lower taxes, they reinstitute unemployment protections, and they start public works back up again. But Papen does not get much credit for this as it's happening. In July 1932, he renegotiates the payment schedules of reparations, and although it indefinitely extends a moratorium, it does contain a remainder of $3 billion to be paid at some point. The public is outraged, and the recovery measures go unnoticed just then. But by the end of 1932, the recovery is felt in the wallets of the public. Unemployment is finally dropping, and GDP is rising once again. According to some analysis, this contributes to the decline in votes the Nazis capture in the November elections. But as we know, Papen's next move is to help Hitler seize power. So contrary to popular belief, Hitler does not inherit an economy in free fall. And at his side, he has one of the architects of German economic success in the 1920s, who has now become the banker of the Nazis. He is Hjalmar Schacht, a well-connected financier with a colorful past. During the Great War, he went from deputy director of the big national bank Dresdner Bank to banking commissioner of occupied Belgium, a position from which he is fired when it becomes clear that he's been channeling state money destined for purchases in Belgium through Dresdner Bank to profit from the transfer fees. Despite this, he becomes part of the Weimar administration after the war. In 1923, during hyperinflation, he is one of the architects of the recovery plan and the new gold currency, the Rentenmark, and starts serving as president of the Reichsbank in November that year. He has connections to international businessmen, politicians, financiers like American banker J.P. Morgan and Governor of the Bank of England Montague Norman, who is a close personal friend. He is instrumental in negotiating the changes to reparation plans, and he manages German monetary policy into the Golden 20s. He's also instrumental in financing for big corporations like IG Farben and a proponent of capital cartel building to concentrate financial power for growth, okay? His political views are fairly mainstream and initially liberal democratic. In 1918, he co-founds the center-right German Democratic Party, the DDP. He is not an anti-Semite and will, in fact, become one of the only vocal critics of the Nazi persecution of Jews who does not lose his position or end up in concentration camps. Okay, he will end up in concentration camp in 1944, but that is for being a passive supporter in the July 20th plot against Hitler. Anyhow, by 1926, he has growing concerns about the inclusion of socialists in the Weimar Republic administration and about increased public spending. He is also becoming convinced that the only way for Germany to regain position on the international stage is aggressive financial growth by slashing interest rates below sustainability and rearmament to boost industry and regain respect, both of which require actions forbidden under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. He leaves the DDP and becomes an independent. In September 1930, he resigns as president of the Reichsbank in protest against modification by the administration to the renegotiated reparations under the New Young Plan, which he has co-created. The global economy is now in crisis, and Schacht sees this as an opportunity for Germany to take action. Historian Amos E. Simpson, and Schacht biographer, puts it this way: as the powers became more involved in their own economic problems in 1931 and 1932, a strong government based on a broad national movement could use the existing conditions to regain Germany's sovereignty and equality as a world power. Although Schacht does not go through a real shift of ideology, he is now ready to back Hitler, whom he has come to believe fulfills those criteria. It is Schacht that rounds up the support of industrialists and financiers that Hitler needs to seize power by introducing Hitler to the business world. Hitler impresses leading German capitalists by reassuring them that no socialist measures will come from a government of the National Socialist Party. During the December 1932 and January 1933 political gridlock, it is Schacht that puts together the broad petition from top businessmen to President Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as chancellor. He now becomes Hitler's main financial advisor and will be the architect of the Nazi economy. Schacht does not join the Nazi Party, but still, in March 1933, he is again made president of the Reichsbank, and in August 34, Reich Minister of Economics. Hitler and Schacht is a match made in heaven, well, or hell, depending how you look at it. Okay. The vision that they share is of a German economy let loose to prosper. Hitler, because he has a magical belief that there is some natural destiny for success of the German race, and if you just get rid of all the things he believes that stands in the way of that, the Jews, liberalism, Bolshevism, success is inevitable no matter what. Schacht, a bit more astute, believes that in a deregulated, finance-friendly market, the power of big corporations can prosper and strengthen the economy as a whole. They have a problem, though. Germany has, since the 1880s, been a social market economy, which is like a free market economy with an addition of a moderate amount of labor laws, union rights, and social security, as well as strong antitrust legislation to stop cartel building, price fixing, things like that. This is a construction created by conservative Chancellor Bismarck back then in order to make some concessions to liberals and socialists and stop a drift to the left. It has been largely successful. The socialist tendencies of left-wing components of the Weimar administrations and the need to prop up businesses during the years of crisis has also resulted in an increase in the number of nationalized businesses, though. That all needs to go. In May 1933, all unions are abolished and replaced with the Deutsche Arbeitsfront, DAF, a sham single union within the Nazi Party that is meant to give workers a feeling that the party works and cares for them. In reality, Schacht is repealing labor protection laws en masse, like limits on part-time work, limits on overtime, sectional minimum wages, furlough protection, notice times, and so forth. They mask it by upholding unemployment benefits and with cosmetic programs like DAF travels that only really benefit very few. Although wages will go up under the Nazis, they will never return to pre-Nazi levels as share of GDP. Unemployment will also continue to decrease, but that is partly due to more part-time employment, eliminating swaths of the public like women, political dissidents, and Jews from the unemployment statistics. The number of women in the German workforce will not return to 1927 levels until the 1950s, not even during the coming war years. Next, they get rid of almost all antitrust laws and encourage big businesses to form cartels to protect their market positions both domestically and abroad. This is basically carte blanche for a small group of capital holders to print money for themselves without having to care about fair business practices. In exchange, the corporations subjugate themselves to ideological oversight so that no un-German aspects creep into their business practices. Things like trading with Jewish businesses, allowing liberal, politically minded employees, employing married women, and so on. The ideological oversight also inserts political education into corporate culture so that workers are kept in line with Nazi doctrine. They also slash taxes for big businesses in the cartels. To offset this loss of revenue, they increase corporate gains taxes for small to medium enterprises and companies that don't join the cartels. In industries that they don't consider valuable to the Nazi ideology or don't contribute to the aggressive growth towards an international position of respect, they even tax gross revenue instead of profits. And then they start a massive privatization program. The constant sale of government-owned businesses provides between 1% and 3% of the entire annual budget. And they need the money to invest in massive public works to create better infrastructure and, more than anything, rearmament. This does keep the economic wheels of recovery spinning, but it also has another effect. Coupled with the decentralized extreme freedom of local party leaders to define the law, the liberalization of all legal regulations opens up the economy to be robbed by the party. Party executives like Goering, Hitler, and Goebbels enriched themselves by paying extraordinary salaries and bonuses, seizing businesses for themselves, and stealing expropriated goods. On the regional, on the local levels, Gauleiters and party functionaries extort, blackmail, and steal land, money, and valuables as they like. Criminals from outside the party are, on the other hand, harshly punished, creating the false feeling crime is going down. Schacht and Hitler are also running a criminal scam to circumvent the limitations on financing rearmament. The Mayfo bills are government bonds that have no real backing in the economy. Basically, they're selling junk bonds at a high price to the German people. But it is here that a rift starts forming between Schacht and Hitler. Schacht supports rearmament, but only to the point that it's affordable. Hitler doesn't care about the economy. He wants to go to war and believes that future conquests will compensate for the deficits war creates. When Schacht protests in 1936, Hitler answers by appointing Hermann Goering as second economic minister. Schacht resigns as Minister of Economy in 1937, partly as protest, but also because the Mayfo bill scam is threatening to unravel by that time. So, just 3 years after starting what was supposed to be an economic miracle, the Nazis have now drifted into heavy overspending for ideological reasons. They are now on a path that will, for financial reasons alone, lead to war. When you add it all up, the effects on the German economy is not great. Hitler and Schacht did not create growth in GDP that was any higher than a previous normal year post-World War I like 1927. Before 1927, reparations were still impacting the German economy, and from 1929, the Depression pulled it down. There is a big rally in 1933, though, the year Hitler seizes power, but that year, the whole world economy was moving towards recovery. So this was pretty much average growth that cannot be attributable to any specific economic policy. And more importantly, as economic policy takes time to have any measurable effect on the economy, any growth in 1933 is from von Pappen's programs and cannot be attributed to Schacht and the Nazis. In parallel, though, they face increasing sanctions and restrictions on trade by the democratic Western powers. To fix this, at least temporarily, they create a kind of extended isolationism by reducing their trading partners to friendly states in order to avoid the impact of the sanctions and falling resource and good prices around the world. They also artificially push up national income by inflating prices within that closed trade system. So the resulting international trade system is not sustainable, especially as it requires these limited trade partners to be extended at some point, and this in turn again leaves them with no other way than conquest. The only way you can see it all as being great is if you compare it to the dismal years of hyperinflation in the 20s and the dip of after the 1929 crash. Moreover, as growth was starting from a heavily contracted economy after the crash, growth in real numbers was not as impressive as the percentile growth should indicate. And this was growth artificially in preparation for conquest of resources and economic might. It is specifically here that the catch-22 of needing growth to conquer, to create growth, negates any possible positive effects. And you really see it in the numbers for 1937 and 38. Technically, these years should automatically be higher growth years, as the economy grows through Anschluss of Austria and the annexation of parts of Czechoslovakia. Instead, we see a slowing GDP growth, which indicates that without annexations, the picture would be grimmer. So already before a war breaks out, the Nazi economic bubble is set to burst under the weight of waging a war they cannot really afford. So where does the myth of the good Hitler years come from? Well, part of it is probably post-fact cognitive dissonance to self-justify why you supported that Nazi. Another part is the perception of things getting better because they were even worse before. But what about all the money they stole? Couldn't that be the reason for the good Hitler years, at least for those who weren't robbed? Well, no, because although the Nazis systematically plundered people they persecuted and murdered, and in Germany alone, they confiscated more than a year's worth of GDP from the German Jews. This is redistribution of wealth in a very nasty way. But redistribution does not create growth. It just moves money around. Moreover, incarcerating these people or murdering them takes them out of the productive economy. So any effect redistribution could have had is nullified. As they start gobbling up nations, they use slavery and forced labor to offset this effect. But this too is short-sighted and fairly uneconomic. Here, we must not forget that the reason for persecution and murder of undesirables is not financial, but ideological. And let's also not forget, most of what they steal does not go into the system. The party leaders and Gauleiters keep it for themselves. Self-enrichment and ideological fanaticism. Two concepts that maybe are not the best basis on which to run a nation. Hjalmar Schacht certainly didn't think so. By 1938, he is even a passive supporter of the resistance and secretly advocating for a coup. And yet he is the very man that has created this mess by enabling the Nazis. Hitler has once again outsmarted those that think they can use him to gain political advantage while controlling his fanaticism. Germany is now an economic steam train headed at full speed into a tunnel, and no one knows where that tunnel ends. There's no engineer to hit the brakes, and the train just keeps on picking up speed. Hitler and Goering have created a system of growth that will leave them no option for armistice. They must fight, and they must win all the way to the oil fields of the Caucasus, the steel in the north, the factories in the west, and the grain in the east. That's what they hope is at the end of that tunnel, fuel for their train. But as long as they are in the tunnel, they will resort to burning the only fuel they have on board, the passengers. If you'd like to see our video on how the Treaty of Versailles did not cause the Nazis' rise to power, you can click right here for that any second now. Our patron of the week is Sam Benda. Be like Sam and join the TimeGhost army to ensure that we can make more content just like this. Subscribe and ring that bell, and it's not the economy, stupid. It's the stupid economy. Get it? May you be prosperous. Cheers. Whilst.